Welcome to the Talk, Listen, Collaborate podcast. You've undoubtedly heard the hype around ChatGPT, the powerful artificial intelligence website that has the ability to answer almost every question you ask it. You may be wanting to learn more information about this latest technology innovation, including the impacts on teaching, learning, and health science. If so, you've come to the right place. Thank you for tuning in to this informative three-part podcast series, Let's Have a Chat About ChatGPT. In this series, we'll discuss what ChatGPT is, current and potential applications, as well as how to stay up to date on the evolving technology. No matter how much or how little you currently know about ChatGPT, our plan is that you'll get something out of listening here today. Here with me guiding this discussion, you'll have my two other friendly TLC team members, Brittany and Julie. Brittany, please say hello to our listeners.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
Julie, would you like to say hello as well?
Hi, thanks for being here today.
And behind the scenes, we have Miss Brenda Jackson. She's also our very friendly TLC teammate. Brittany, Julie, and I are honored to be joined today by Dr. John Behrens from Notre Dame, who will help lead us off this conversation. Dr. Behrens is currently the director of the IDSIC Computer and Digital Technologies program, as well as the director of the College Technology Initiatives in the College of Arts and Letters. In addition to all of that, which I'm sure is keeping him plenty busy, he's a full professor in the practice of digital learning program as well. I know Dr. Behrens from my time at ATSU and the folklore, the legend that lives on when his time there. But more recently, I worked closely with John at Pearson. And at Pearson, Dr. Behrens was famous for leading a fantastic team of technologists who influenced the future of educational technology. In fact, John has been at the forefront designing and developing smart learning experiences powered by things such as machine learning for a few decades. Currently at Notre Dame, previously at Pearson, as well as Cisco and even at ASU, how I would summarize Dr. Behrens' background is that he lives in the space between computer science, learning science, and data science. Lots of sciences. John, we're honored and thrilled to have you on the show today. Welcome.
Well, thank you so much, Quincy. It's an honor to be here. I'm delighted.
Appreciate you. Hey, as mentioned, you have an extensive background in developing artificial intelligence and machine learning experiences. All of a sudden, almost at the end of last year, this new tool came on the scenes like hotcakes called ChatGPT, which stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. Considering AI is really not that new of a technology, why do you suppose this version of technology has caught the world on fire?
Yeah, that's a great question, Quincy. The underlying technologies, the what we call the large language models and the foundational models, they've been around for a couple of years. And OpenAI had opened a version called GPT-3. And before that, there was GPT-2. And lots of academics in computer science around the world actually continue to do research using these earlier versions. And that's how there's a lot of academic papers are published. And the quality has increased over the last few years. This technology is about 5 years old. And the actual application, the availability for technical people, computer scientists to do the research has been the last maybe 2 years. And the quality was starting to get pretty good toward the second half of last year. But there had also been some starts and stops. Facebook had released something last year and then they pulled it back because of some of the criticism about its behavior. Somehow OpenAI got it to a place where when people experienced it in the chat mode, which was new in November, the chat mode kind of moving it from a batch mode to a chat mode. When it got to that chat mode, somehow it kind of crossed a boundary of usableness or interactiveness that really caught things on fire. I had met a recent graduate at Notre Dame in September, and she said all anybody is talking about was GPT-3, which is the prior version. And then when the ChatGPT came in November, well, then somehow the whole public got a hold of it. Everybody from the junior high kid to your grandma, and it's just been crazy ever since.
That's amazing. Okay, so for those who have not opened up ChatGPT and actually used it, it might sound a little abstract for those folks. I can type in a question or a command, which is called a prompt, into a text box, and I'll receive a response generated by AI pretty quickly. And for those who are listening, we've linked to a video that will demonstrate the tool in action if you'd like to go check that out. I think it's very helpful. So for those who don't consider themselves technology savvy, can we talk a little bit about what is going on under the hood? How does it work? How would you describe it for those folks?
Yeah, great. So let's just first talk about a little bit what it does. So it's basically a super well-made chatbot. And what it happens in a chatbot is you kind of type things in as if it was a person, and then it replies back as a person. And you see this in lots of customer service situations where you might want to know something about how to do something on a banking website or something like that. You chat something in, and often you're not talking to a person, you're just talking to software that's saying, oh, well, that's a common question. Here's the common answer. And it can be very simple. But what's happening in these new large language models is they've taken lots and lots of web pages. I mean, billions of web pages, and they've brought them into the database, and then they've figured out the correlations of the relationships between the different words. So if I have this word, John, what's the most likely next word after that? Well, probably the word is. So I'm going to make a sentence, John is. And then what's the most likely word after that? John is, well, it's going to depend on the context and depend on the question. So then it's going to figure out the probabilities based on the kind of question. Did you ask about what I look like? And then it'll give you a word, something like I look like. But what the amazing thing here is that the whole way the system works is statistical probabilities of words. All it is a word prediction engine. It's the world's best word prediction engine. And so it makes sentences by adding words on and on and on. And because it knows how language works, it looks super fluent and it sounds super fluent. And if you ask it about something that it has lots of data about, there's lots of web pages in the world that it has lots of these probabilities about, well, then it's going to reply to you in a way like a human would, because some of our knowledge works the same way. We know how words should be put together, and in different contexts, we put words together in different ways. So that's what it's learned, is how people put words together. And if you ask it something about where there's lots of information, it's going to give you a very sensible answer. But if you ask it something for which there's not a lot of information on the web or in its training data, it's still going to answer because that's what it's meant to do. But it's just going to put words together that we call hallucinations. They're just not true. It's because it doesn't have a model of truth. It just has a model of word probability. If I know all these words are in the sentence, what's the next word to be? And we add them up. And many times that looks great, and it's real, and it's helpful, and it's informative. But sometimes it's just not true. And sometimes it's even a little crazy. So it's wonderful, but it's not perfect. And part of the complexity of it all is it's so good at language that you feel like you're talking to a human, because it's learned how humans talk. And that's the thing it's best at, is sounding like a human. Not always talking like a human in terms of knowledge, but sounding like a human. And so then you also get this whole giant emotional reaction, like, oh my gosh, look at this. And if people look at your video, when you see how fast it happens, you get another layer of, oh my gosh, can you even believe this is happening? So the language facility, the fluency, kind of throws you off and sucks you in a way. And then you think, oh my gosh, it's so smart, but it's really just super fluent. And sometimes it's really helpful, and sometimes it's just needs a little extra help.
I think what you're pointing out is that this is where the technology is right now. They're going to make improvements to this technology, and we're seeing that in super sped up mode. I was reading an article that said that in March, Google announced that it was bringing AI-powered chat technology to Gmail and Google Docs, helping it compose emails and documents. It was also going to introduce it into Word and Excel and bundle it with ChatGPT called Copilot. What I think is very interesting is it's already planning for down the road for future integrations with tools that we may already be using. I would think that most of us would be familiar with technologies like Alexa, Google, and Siri. How do you think that's different from ChatGPT? Do you think that it's close enough where it's very similar? Do you see a distinct difference?
Well, first, let me make a comment about those things coming down the road. So there was a version of Copilot for software developers last year, and they just released in March a new version. And there's many software developers that are using Copilot all day long. And so the computer programming software development world is already being dramatically changed by dramatic improvements in efficiency. This is not down the road. This is already happening like right now. So I just want to call that out. These things are changing. March was an amazing time. We have a blog at our Notre Dame website called AI March Madness because so many things changed in March. Just an explosion. It's hard to imagine. Now, is it the same or is it kind of the next thing? It's an extension of things that have happened, but it's an incremental step up. It's a big step up, and the difference is the way Siri was most likely designed was that it would be taught when you hear these sounds, it means this thing. When you hear these sounds, it means this thing. When people talk this way, do this thing. And it's done through AI and machine learning, but it's done kind of in pieces, and it's done in kind of very focused way. What's happening now with these large language models is that because it knows so much about so much different kinds of language, it can generate things that we're not expecting, rather than having to train each little application kind of individually and intensely. There's this underlying layer of language capability that, as you said, the companies are starting to, well, we can use it here and we can use it here. So it's not that you have to make a different AI for each one of these things. There's a foundation that lets you kind of jump into the next level of specificity with already having all this capability about how language works for humans and how to sound like a human. So huge differences in the ability to not start from scratch every time you want to make an AI model now, because there's kind of this universal layer of language that you're going to build on rather than starting from scratch. And as Quincy mentioned, just 5 years ago, we were doing applications in that very starting from scratch way every time. So the speed, and that's part of the speed of change that we're seeing now. The speed is tremendous because things are building on each other with this underlying foundation.
Incredible. So I promise I won't hold you to it, but can I convince you to pull out your crystal ball and give us a prediction? Where do you think we're going next? And it sounds like it'll be next week, but where are we going next? Because it's going so quickly.
Yeah, so one of the things that happened in March, as I said, a lot of things happened in March, but one of the things that happened is that APIs were released for OpenAI. API stands for Application Program Interface. It's basically a way one computer can talk to another computer. And what that means is I can, as a developer, I can make an application and I can use the underlying ChatGPT capabilities. So I'll give you an example. One of the things ChatGPT is really good at is genres. And so, for instance, because again, it knows how people talk, it knows different genres. So for instance, if I want to write a press release and I say to ChatGPT, write a press release, I just did this with some of my students last night. John Behrens is going to be the provost at Notre Dame. And John is an AI researcher and blah, blah, blah. Well, what does ChatGPT do? Well, ChatGPT says for immediate release, South Bend, Indiana, University of Notre Dame. It knows all that stuff about how press releases should be. It says some nice things about me. Some are true, some are false. Then it says, then it has the president saying how excited he is that I'm coming, and puts the president's name, all that stuff, because it knows about language and it knows a little bit about Notre Dame. Now, another thing it's really good at, and we did this with the students last night, is you could say, now take that press release and you just write it right in the chat. You don't have to redo the whole thing. You just say, now revise that press release for a second grader. Okay, well then it says, Notre Dame has a new boss. His name's John. He's really smart. And so I didn't have to rewrite anything because ChatGPT is great at genres and it's great at rewriting. And that's what it's super good at. It wasn't great at truth and it just made stuff up. Now, so what if I want to make an app, which is talk to an X grader, talk to a second grader, talk to a third grader? Well, I can make an app now where you put in your text and then you have a button and the button says what grade you want that for. And then what I'll do is I'll have my little app send the data to ChatGPT through the API, and then ChatGPT will send it back to my app. And you'll think I'm the smartest guy in the world, but in fact, I'm just sending the data to ChatGPT and back. And that's the kind of thing that can happen. And so we're going to see this rapidly evolving ecosystem of people developing things that use the underlying logic. And so another thing, for instance, we saw last month was when ChatGPT was released in its latest version, Khan Academy released a tutor, Duolingo released a language application based on it. There's a law firm or a law technology firm released a system that can summarize information and help you manage large amounts of law information. Because that's another thing that ChatGPT is really good at, which is summarization, again, because it's good with language. So that's the first thing we're going to see is those kind of uses of APIs. The second thing we're going to see is people starting to make their own kind of specific little AI micro worlds. So ChatGPT is great at language kind of across the board, but what if I'm in a specific industry? What if I'm in biotechnology engineering and my language is more specific and ChatGPT doesn't know that language so well? Well, there's ways to kind of add another layer that makes the model more specific. I can kind of, what they call it, fine tuning. I can fine tune the language model to know more about my specific discipline. And that's a thing that we're going to see as well. So we're going to see all that complexity. And the other thing we're going to see is a huge arms race between the top technology companies. It caught everybody by surprise. I think even it caught OpenAI by surprise. It caught everybody by surprise. Microsoft had invested huge amounts in OpenAI, so they are the winners right now. Google is wondering what the heck happened. Amazon just said they're gonna, start releasing some stuff. So everybody's like, their head is spinning. So we're gonna have an arms race of what everybody else can do. And so that means we don't know what's gonna happen because some of the world's smartest technology people are inventing all kinds of things that we don't even know about right now. But there's, again, a foundation of how to do things with language that we haven't had before, and it's going to open a lot of doors. Let me just give you a couple other examples of the kinds of things it does that you may not know about. So sometimes you'll see a prompt like, tell me a story for a video game. And then people use that story to write a video game. It's really good at stories because it's really good at language, and a story doesn't have to be correct. So you don't need to worry about whether it's correct or not because it's a video game story. But when ChatGPT in the latest version got released last month, another thing happened, which was they did a demo where they showed a picture of a website to ChatGPT and they said, make the software for this website. And guess what it did? It made the software. And that's because that's probably the biggest strength of ChatGPT is actually writing software code. And that's because software code is highly deterministic. The probabilities are always very high. It's much more predictable than humans. So Brittany, you asked me what time it is, and I told you how to make a watch, but things are going to continue to go crazy in ways we don't understand.
So this is all really exciting, right? You're talking about these ideas that we can riff on, we can expand things, we have this horizon really that we can reach for. And so I think hearing that really brings up some questions about opportunities, but also risks, right, of this technology. From an educational perspective, what do you think are some of those top benefits and challenges?
Yeah, great. So before we get to education, I think the thing we need to think about is that the goalposts of how things are done outside of education have changed first. So, like I said, computer programming, text summarization has changed. And that's something a lot of people do. One thing it's really good at is marketing material. I mentioned press releases as an example. That's the kind of thing. Here's a description of my company, write some marketing material. So in the world outside of education, things are going to be changing. Industry is changing already. And so I think the first thing we need to think about in education is it's not an education situation, it's a societal situation, and education needs to change to think about that, because maybe what we teach, not just how we teach, but what we teach needs to evolve. And that's a tough go. That's a tough go. It's going to take time to absorb that. Okay, then the second thing is we're in the classroom and we ask the students to write a paper, and then everybody pulls up the second browser window and our heads explode, right? So the question is, where does ChatGPT fit in the writing world, and where do the humans fit in the writing world? What does it do to the relationship between the instructor and the students? Well, the first thing is the instructor needs to be really clear about where ChatGPT fits into the ecosystem. You know, it's like calculators. Sometimes you want to let the student use calculators. Maybe you're in a calculus class and you want to know whether they're proficient at calculus. You don't care about their arithmetic skills. But maybe you're teaching multiplication and you don't want them to use a calculator because you're trying to teach multiplication. Similar kind of thing. Professors are going to have to be more careful about kind of decomposing the parts of the task, the parts of the activities, what's core and what's context, what's essential. And if you're trying to teach writing and thinking about writing, then you probably don't want them to do it. But if you care a little bit less about the format and you care more about something else, then maybe it's okay. Same thing with computer programming. Maybe it's okay because you're preparing them for a world where they're going to be doing it. But then if they do it too much, then they won't know how to do the most important thing, which is evaluate whether ChatGPT actually did the real thing or hallucinated a system that's going to bring your airplane down. So we're always going to need the people to be smarter than the software. So there's lots of kind of layers of what goes on in the classroom situation and the overall pedagogical situation that we're in. But I think is actually a good thing because it forces the instructor to think about, again, well, when I did that assignment, what was I really trying to get at? Now, remember, it's also good where it's had a lot of training data and it's good at facts. So if you give it a task if you give the human a task, let's say, here's some data, and I want you to make up a hypothesis about the data, and I want you to explain the logic of your hypothesis and kind of make the scientific argument and convince me why you're right. Well, ChatGPT is not going to be so good at that in general. It might sometimes say things that look like that. You have to be careful. So that's another thing going on, is think about what's uniquely human that you want the student to do and focus on that. And so it will help us rethink, are we really asking the students the right question? So there could be a good thing there, but there's also a lot of mess, and it's going to take time to kind of get the yin and yang of all that.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. There's the murky waters, surely. I love what you're sharing and kind of that call to action of really thinking intentionally about what we're asking our learners to know, what we're asking them to demonstrate, and our assessments doing that now, right? With or without ChatGPT being used in the class. I think one of the things, kind of a little bit of a riff on the original question, I think we're all probably hearing statements like, what if my students stop thinking for themselves or they get overly reliant on this technology? And when you hear those types of questions, how are you personally responding to that?
Yeah, great. So I think the first thing is, again, to get back to this idea that many of us in the teaching professions, we've had our pattern. We've been doing, this is the way we were taught, this is the way we do it. I know this works. I get the evidence out of the activities from the student that I'm looking for. And we have a whole kind of way of working there. But what that means sometimes is, we talk sometimes about the hidden curriculum. Well, part of the hidden curriculum is we don't have to talk about what's important because everything in my class is important. But now when the students are being driven to the same, to this, why do I need to know this? Well, it opens up the conversation about, what? When you get out and, when you are out, somebody's going to have to evaluate whether the AI is doing the right thing or not. And how are you going to be able to evaluate whether it's writing properly if you can't write? And how are you going to evaluate whether it's done the correct analysis if you can't analyze? And how are you going to know that it's functionally made the thing you wanted in computer science if you don't know how to functionally create the tests and the logic? And then the other thing is people forget, sometimes we get this idea like, oh, it's doing my thing. It's doing the task. But what happens in real life is the humans have done a whole bunch of things before they get to that one task. They've decided what the important problem is. They've narrowed down the sets of, and then they sit down and they say, okay, write this one little thing. And they confuse that one little thing that ChatGPT is good at with all the things that have happened before to get to that place: the problem recognition, the problem definition, the problem kind of solution space definition. And that's why ChatGPT is not right now going to be doing creative theses. It's going to be answering questions, and that's different.
I want to add to that. So one of the things I've been really leaning into is that this tool potentially frees up our time to do the more human things. Focus on the connections in our classrooms. Do the things that this tech tool can't do. I loved the webinar you did with Kristen DeCerbo, the Chief Learning Officer at Khan Academy, when she was explaining how the tutor can identify maybe where a student had gone wrong in the process. That helps maybe an at-risk student, and that's time that the educator didn't have to spend. They could be doing something else, thinking about the next instructional activity where they're going to collaborate. So I don't know that it completely frees up our time, but it frees up our time to be more human. What do you think about that idea?
Okay, so I've been saying that for 20 years in technology product development. And I think in many times it's been great and it's really helped. But we've also seen examples of some social, cultural, contextual issues that we have to keep an eye on. For instance, in some contexts, it's easier to, quote, plunk the kid down in front of the computer. And that might happen differentially depending on kind of social economic background. Does a school that can't afford the high touch of the teachers replace some of that human necessary high touch with the less high touch, the artificial touch, or not even a touch, the artificial experience of the computer? So I think in all these things, in all these technologies, there's always going to be a good part and a bad part. And we have to be vigilant about not kind of over focusing on it's good at this one thing, but think about kind of layers and layers of possible ecosystem effects. We think about like Facebook. When Facebook was first invented, it was like, oh, look at that. It's going to connect the world. Well, yeah, it connected the world, and it's led to the undermining of democracy in some people's views because of the ability to use the information and create fake news and disseminate it and all kinds of things. So I'm excited with you. I hope you can hear it in my voice. I'm excited to be talking about it. I think there's lots of possibility, but I also want to make sure we're a little kind of sober or somber about this, because societal education is a societal process, and it will get kind of morphed because of that. And so we're going to have to, as educators, we're going to have to keep that flag up about, hey, wait a minute, education's more than just completing tasks in a row, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of with that idea of being vigilant and keeping our eyes open, you talked about some examples that you've used with your students, or examples of ways we can use ChatGPT where it's hallucinated or it's done some things factually and kind of filled in some of that space, right, based on the model and statistics. Yeah. So I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about, how do we prepare ourselves? How do we prepare our students to use this tool, not have those blinders on when it comes to the results that we're getting back really rapidly from the system? How do we teach critical thinking in the age of ChatGPT?
Yeah. Well, great. I think it's actually a great place to bring in just the idea of the experiment from science, because we don't know how ChatGPT is going to react in any one context. That's kind of part of the human feel of it. We don't know what it's going to say, and we don't know if it's going to say something that is useful or something that's not useful. The CEO of Microsoft last month said that sometimes it makes useful errors, which was his way of saying what everyone else is calling hallucination. But in fact, that might actually be the case, right? So when is it creativity and when is it a hallucination? That's a social construct that depends on lots of things that go on. But the important thing is you don't trust it. You treat it like an intern or something like that. But more importantly, you have an empirical relationship with it. Like, I want you to do this thing, and I'm going to give you this prompt, and I'm going to see what you do. And if it does what I want, then we're okay. And I'm going to document it. So I'm keeping track of what's happened. But I also might want to change it. And the nice thing about ChatGPT, as I said before, you can interact with it iteratively, but keep track and treat it as an experiment. Don't treat it as like your best friend who's going to do exactly what you want, because it's not your best friend. It's not a person. Don't treat it like a person, and run your relationship with it like an ongoing experiment. Well, what if I ask it this way? What if I ask it this way? What if I ask it to give me 5 ideas about how to do this task that I have to do? Well, then what if I ask it to do 10? It's going to give me, some will be the same, but some will be different, because it's based on probability and it will fluctuate. And so know that it's limited by the data it's been fed, and it's limited by the probabilities that it's aware of. So I'll give you one example there. Most of the data was loaded before 2021. Now, it might have changed in the last few weeks, but 2 weeks ago, if you asked it about the war in the Ukraine, it would not know anything. It would tell you about the war in Crimea, because that's the data from 2012, because that's the data it had. And people will say, oh, it's biased, it's Russian propaganda. No, it's not that. It just didn't have the data. So understand how it works, spend time with it, experiment, and verify. Be cautious and verify. But it doesn't have a knowledge model. Slowly, knowledge will get connected to it through the internet and other kinds of places. But right now, you just have to be careful. Treat it like an experiment. And we're teaching a class in the fall about it, and that's going to be the primary theme. Is every time you interact with it is an experiment.
I love that idea, and the ways that we can lean in with curiosity and almost like play, right? What if we ask it this way? What if I re-ask the question, or I ask it to modify, right? What happens if I add these parameters, or I take those parameters away, and really allowing ourselves, but our students as well, to play around with language, play around with the answers, the regenerate feature, right? That it can provide you to re-answer the same question with running it again.
Yeah.
Ways that we can lean in, not without those blinders and not without critical thinking,
That's right.
but use it as that experiment. I love that idea.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. I think of it sometimes as like a big kind of fun simulation, and it's just, I like your idea of play there. I really like that. The other thing that's interesting is it's been trained on the data from, not a perfect sample of our culture, but a lot of our culture. So sometimes when it says things you don't like, I'm always like, well, wonder where it got that, but it got it from somewhere in our culture. It's a little bit of a mirror of the society in some ways. It's not perfect because it has a little bit more here and a little bit less there of the sampling of our society, but it's got some of that going.
Interesting, interesting. John, I would like to pivot slightly here and talk about access to the tool. So, one of the things I think that helped it, become so rapidly popular was the fact that it was free to access. You had to sign up, and then they slowly let people get access to it. And on the website, they're starting to monetize it. You can buy tokens for the amount of usage in these things. There's even subscriptions coming out. I could see a day where the future iterations, looking into my crystal ball, that maybe there's a Chat GPT for educators, or a Chat GPT for anatomy or biomechanics, or these type of things, and you just sign up for it, and that's what you get. It the model's trained on that genre of information. With that being said, what are your thoughts on access and equitable access? We know this is already going on, that those that have, can go on, get an education, do these type of things. Is this going to be a barrier, do you think? What is your prognosis on people being able to have access to this and leveling the playing field, so to speak, if this thing really does take off? Because you can see, this being a differentiator. Come to our school. We use the best and brightest technology. Come our way, students. And then next thing you know, there's a crop of folks that are getting left behind. What do you think about that idea?
Are you asking me if we're going to fix capitalism in the next 6 months?
Yes. No.
Yeah. So maybe the problem isn't even capitalism, because in many countries around the world that are capitalist countries, the internet is free, and everyone thinks, well, the internet is a utility, just like the electrical utilities are regulated in the United States, and the water utilities are regulated in the United States. Why? Because they want to ensure everybody has access to those. They think it's just something everybody needs to have access to. In many countries, the internet is considered that way. Now we're at a place, but not in the United States, but now we're at a place where brand new technology, no one's going to want to slow it down right now. Everyone's just going to let 1,000 flowers bloom and see what happens. And the competition will lower price for a while, but then we'll have all kinds of market forces over time. So we'll have to see what happens. It will be an interplay between kind of government policy about what's regulated and what's funded. For instance, in the other countries, the government just funds the internet. Is there going to be a time at which people just say, well, we'll fund access to these kind of AI models in the same way we fund access to books through financial aid, or there's lots of different mechanisms, but it's going to take kind of a political social will to recognize it first as an access issue, and recognize it as a policy target, and then things will have to evolve that way. So I think it's an important concern, but I don't think it's built into the technology. It's built into how our society relates to technology and relates to access about technology in the educational context.
Fair enough. Capitalism, I get it. Will rule the day. Is thinking about the same idea of equity and access to technology and for learning, if it's subsidized or not, if it's subscription or not. Do you have thoughts on maybe in the classroom at the micro level, what what should we be doing to level the playing field? Because some folks have really fast processors, some people have really slow, some people don't have laptops at all. We saw this issue during the pandemic, right? So is there things that you're seeing? Are you hearing about treating this in the classroom, in the smaller space as an individual, as an educator, do you think?
Yeah, so I think it really varies quite a bit from different contexts. I think from an AI perspective, another thing to keep in mind is the relationship between the and the level of functioning or proficiency, I don't want to anthropomorphize the AI too much, but you could think of it having a certain level of proficiency. Maybe it functions like an 11th grader in terms of writing. Let's just take that as an example. Well, that's fine, for instance, to use to teach writing or help assist in writing practice. We don't want to replace the whole larger human process, but perhaps to get examples or perhaps to have some help with editing for the 10th grader and the 9th grader and the 8th grader, but it's not going to help the 12th grader and the college student. So there's this interplay between the different kinds of proficiencies the AI functions, the functional levels of the AI, and who it's interacting with in what way. So some professors are saying, for instance, well, one thing I do is I have the student, we put the activity into ChatGPT, it writes the essay, and then we critique it as the human activity. Well, that's fine if the students are smarter than ChatGPT, but if they're not, then that's not going to work. So there's always going to be this interplay of the characteristics of the human, the characteristics of the task, and the characteristics of the AI. And so there's always going to be that interplay. It will depend very much, and how that plays out into issues around equity is just going to be manifold based on the social political environments that the educational process is embedded in.
So before wrapping up this fascinating conversation, I wondered if we could pose a couple of questions that we've collected from our ATSU educators. Would you be open to that?
Great, yeah, you bet. I'm just going to type them right into ChatGPT, and then I'm going to read them back. So give me a couple seconds in between.
Amazing. So we've received quite a few questions from educators. And again, it's kind of been pervasive through our chat about integrity, academic integrity, content creation. For example, there's a lot of fear in which our students are using ChatGPT, and I'm sure you've heard these concerns from your perspective. How accurate would you say that the tools to identify the text that have been formulated by AI are? And should we put our trust in those if we're interested in detection?
Well, it's hard for me not to answer without going to the full use of the vernacular, because they're just terrible as far as we know. So you got to kind of keep a focus on those are ostensibly AI machine learning tools. When researchers create those tools in a research environment, they should give very detailed information about false positives, true positives, false negatives, and so on. If you don't see that, then red flags, all kinds of flags should go up. It's not even worth looking at, because you don't know the error rate of your decision making, okay? And there's two kinds of error rates actually that go on in this context. One is the error rate of the software, and then the other is the error rate of your decision. Because the overall error rate of you as the professor or you as the head of academic integrity, it's going to be a function of what's the overall probability of anybody cheating interacting with the probability of the software detecting that cheating. And if you don't have those probabilities clear, then you don't know how big of a mistake you're making. So if somebody's publishing something and they say, oh, it's great, we did this thing, but we're not going to give you any technical information, it's very dangerous. If somebody, for instance, OpenAI, they published a new version, they had a detector in the fall, they published a new version in January. They gave very detailed situations and very detailed response of true positive, false positive. When you throw that into some statistical machinery, it was very clear that it would not be very good at decision making. And you'd be concluding that a lot of students that may or may not have cheated were actually cheating. And that's very, very dangerous. And setting up the whole system of how to think about, we're in this adversarial relationship can really hurt the larger educational system. So I think, it'd be nice if those things worked. They might work at some point, but my advice is stay away as much as you can. And if you feel like you absolutely have to, only do it with a tool for which A, the statistical properties are very clear, and B, you understand how to use Bayes' theorem to apply those statistical properties into your specific context. And feel free to call me if you want to know how to do that.
We received a lot of questions that pertain to content creation when using ChatGPT. And we think it relates towards data and information transparency, specifically when it comes to authorship. We can think of some scenarios where an educator may want to use the tool when creating instructional content, and even some researchers who may want to use the tool to brainstorm or help create their own research. Do you have thoughts on how users should credit any content they've created using AI, and how should educators model this for their students?
Yeah, so on my Twitter profile, you know, I have a sentence that's something like, statements are not my own because everything I know I got from other people. And I think there's some of that goes on here. Like if you're copying and pasting from ChatGPT, then I think it makes sense to say done with the help of ChatGPT. I would never copy and paste. There are times where I've put text in and asked it to kind of clean it up. But then when I reread it, sometimes it's fine. It just cleaned up the punctuation. But other times it removes my voice. It doesn't sound like me anymore. Well, that's not me publishing something. That's me throwing something through some machinery. And so I think people just want to be clear, are they writing it or are they using it as a writing aid? If you're using it as a writing aid, I don't think it's that important. But if the ideas are not yours, but mostly what happens is people interact with, they ask, give me a list of ideas, tell me this, tell me that, interact. And it's just like kind of interacting with web pages. You know, I read an article and then I get some thoughts. Some of that thoughts from the article, some of the thoughts from my past history. There's never this clarity. So I think just be clear I wouldn't copy and paste, but if you were going to copy and paste, maybe then that's something to do. Now, I think some of you might have heard the story about there were some college administrators out east who used it to write a letter that was supposed to be a letter of sympathy because of something bad that had happened in the environment. And they put a footnote to be transparent. Well, if you're going to do something that you have to be transparent and it's going to cause a problem, then it's a signal that you shouldn't be doing it in the first place. And, you know, I feel bad for those folks because it was an honest mistake and they were trying to be honest and transparent. But the rules are still evolving. But I'd be really clear, are you using it as a research tool just like reading a paper, or is it doing the work for you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we have time for just one more of our educators' questions. We had a question related to learning analytics. I know we briefly spoke about the virtual tutor example. Could you speak to any other potential roles that you see AI helping identify or help at-risk students early on? How could we intentionally use the tool to help meet those students where they are?
Yeah, so I think I'm really glad to hear this question, because one of the things we haven't spoken much about that I think is very important, and I'm glad we'll have time to talk about it, is the social emotional aspects of interacting with the tool. Lots of times, you know, we think about kind of this abstracted cognitive task, blah, blah, blah. But, you know, we're all in the business because we love students, and the students love us. And as they interact with the tools, then we're going to see different things. So one of the things that we see is that some students that might be limited in their ability to express can actually use it to learn how to express. So maybe you're from an environment that's kind of linguistically kind of impoverished, either because you're from another country or just the neighborhood you grow up in. You're not sure how to compose a letter. You know, you're bright, but you're not sure how to compose a letter. Well, this can help you and it can teach you at the same time. Like, help me write a letter to, ask for a job interview, or so it could do lots of great stuff that way. And so there's lots of possibility for people with lots of different kinds of linguistic, emotional profiles to get help and to help bring them into a more linguistic world. So I think there's lots of possibility there. Again, we want to be careful that we don't use it to supplant our humanness and the importance of the human relationship, but the language capabilities of this could actually be used. And we've seen some stories about students that feel empowered. And the other thing that happens sometimes is it's really good for brainstorming. Like, I'm stuck on this kind of idea. Can you give me some ideas? And then what the student does with that, hopefully they complete the process. But there again, that might relate to certain kind of limitations that students have that can help them overcome that kind of linguistic block. So we need to keep thinking about this, not just in the kind of get things done world, but in the world of all the emotional, social complexity of our students. It's lots of possibilities here.
I deeply appreciate that encouragement. That I think that was the first thing that came to my mind when this really landed and exploded the way it did. I said, the technology, I think, can really support people where they are and help bring people that maybe are struggling to make it in their educational path. So yeah, I love the encouragement. Let's keep thinking about ways to leverage this stuff. Absolutely love it. John, it's absolutely clear that you're plugged in and that we invited the right person to lead us off in this conversation for this podcast. John, how can we keep in touch? How can we stay dialed into the work you're doing, the messaging? You mentioned a blog post. Is there any way that you could share with our listeners how they can listen and follow you? Because you are the person to be paying attention to. That is clear. How can we find you?
Yeah, so the easiest thing is, well, one way would be on LinkedIn.
Okay.
The other way is at Notre Dame, we have a website, AL Tech. AL stands for Arts and Letters. That's the liberal arts college at Notre Dame. AL Tech, TELTECH.nd.edu. And on that website, we have one page called Initiatives, which is the new AI, where we put some things. And also in news and events, we have a blog section now. And would love to keep in touch with folks because it's really about the dialogue. One of the nice things about this whole kind of revolution in a way is that nobody's got the 20-year advantage. Oh, I've been doing ChatGPT for 20 years. I have all the answers. It's really, and because we have the internet and we have open access to things and we have the ability to trade information like this wonderful event we have here today, it's a democratization and it's a giant community, let's figure it all out together time. And it's a delight. And it's been a delight for you guys to invite me. And I've had so much fun. Thanks for reaching out.
Absolutely. John, thank you so much. We appreciate you. Thank you for being our guest on the podcast episode, TLC. Thank you.
My pleasure.
This is the part of the show where we take a moment to reflect on the ideas shared during the discussion. Julie, what was your biggest takeaway, if you can narrow it down to one from today's discussion?
Definitely can't. Oh my goodness, what an amazing conversation. I think one of the pieces that really resonated with me was John's explanation of kind of the back end of the process, right? Looking under the hood or pulling kind of back the curtain on this black box. And I think he really said it in a way that made so much sense to me that I think we could all maybe think of an example, right? He said that, John is, and the predictive analytics that go into drawing from really complicated statistics into making this fluent result, right, that we see in ChatGPT. And I think it just really reminded me of a game that we used to do at slumber parties when I was growing up. There, different versions of it, but, someone would draw a picture and the next person in the circle would look at the picture and write the word. And then the next person would look at the word and draw the picture. And different versions of this. Sometimes it was more telephone-like game. And sometimes it was more of, you draw a line and the next person draws another line and all of a sudden you have this picture. And I guess what it sort of just reminded me is this emotional memory of this connection of how we go through the world making predictions off of different inputs. And I think it just helped me understand a little bit of the ins and outs better of the model, and where, how sometimes, I'm sure we've all had this, an example we can think of, where you're playing telephone and all of a sudden you come back full circle and it's really similar and it was really accurate. And other times where, someone said cat and it ends up with house, and wow, how did we get there? And we all have a giggle. So I think it really just helped me understand kind of some of how the system is working, how sometimes it's really accurate, like you said, and sometimes it has these hallucinations and how it kind of gets there.
Right on. Absolutely. Brittany, what were your takeaways?
It's hard to pick one. I was glued to my monitor during that conversation, but I'm trying to think of the instructor's questions and the answers that he had for us. One of the things I'm landing on is that you're right. A student could come in, put a prompt in, take the output of ChatGPT and turn that in as homework. Or we could design our activities to incorporate ChatGPT for it to be a scaffolding exercise where you have that initial output, and then I have to do something with it. I have to analyze it. I have to maybe debate with the tool. I have to then take that output and work with a group and make a different iteration of that. I have to summarize it in my own words live. There's so many different ways I could be creative as an educator and take this as a challenge and step up to the plate and knock it out of the park.
So spot on, Brittany. If I can riff on that, one thing that jumped out at me that John mentioned, the words, a phrase we've heard so often is hidden curriculum. In the TLC, one thing related to the Course Design Institute and some of our consultations, a common theme is that we're always like, hey, do you really have to, is this really a goal? Is this really something? Well, it's not tied to a learning objective. Well, why are we doing this? Well, we just need to force it in there. In other words, so oftentimes I think it's safe to say that sometimes at ATSU, there's some of the classes and some of the curriculum is pretty stuffed. And what I liked him mentioning is about this might be an opportunity to unclutter and focus on the things, Brittany, that you alluded to, what's human. A lot of what we're doing in health science education and all the different professions, it's about connecting with the patient and teaching our students how to do those things that are hard and challenging, right? So we have to figure it out, like his call to action. We need to figure this out, among other things, how to do that. It's a new reality. It's a new frontier. But I really, that jumped out at me is the hidden curriculum. Hey, I want it to be done a certain way. Okay, can we maybe take that out, give more room? Because I would argue that maybe our students will get more from each of the classes and be able to we'll see better learning outcomes if we could figure this out in a real way where it's not so crowded and we're stuffing so many things. Oh, here's another thing to think about. Here's another thing. Let's stick to what's germane and what we think is going to make them great professionals, right? But if I may double dip, something that jumped out at me is understanding the different, how ChatGPT came to be, and this idea of like why this version, ChatGPT 4, really exploded and is all the craze, is because it was a chat engine as opposed to input and then output, wait a few minutes and these things. It wasn't just what it did, it's how it did it, perhaps, that now people were able to make this really approachable and sensational and intriguing and interesting to them. I was like, that makes sense to me if you think about why some things, fly off the shelf the way they do, and consumers and the mainstream loves it versus something that does the same thing but sits there, right? It totally made sense to me. So I'm so grateful for him to shed light on that. I'm with you. I need a Gatorade after this conversation. I was glued to, I was dialed in. I can't wait to hear from our listeners and what they thought of today's discussion. I hope they get something from it. So before wrapping up, I just want to take a moment here as a team for the TLC team. Just we want to share our gratitude so to those that helped make this episode possible. Our first thanks goes out to Ms. Brenda Jackson, who's an integral part of the TLC. Definitely want to recognize her. And then special thanks to our guest. We really appreciated meeting with Dr. Behrens today, for him taking time out of his busy schedule in the 19 directorships that he has at Notre Dame to share his perspectives. Complete lightning bolt for sure. Very special thank you to you, our listeners. Thank you for taking time to listen to us. I know you're busy. Hopefully you get something out of this. Take a moment, if you will. Let us know what you think. What jumped out to you? What is your takeaway from this very comprehensive discussion we had here today? Perhaps we can get a conversation going in the comments down below. So take a moment, let us know what you think. Thumbs up, thumbs down. We hope you listen in on the next episode that will be coming out next month. We have a couple more for you. This is the first of 3. If you're interested, for those of you who are considering or interested in the Level Up, the TLC Level Up certificate program, if you want credit, smash the link. I don't think that's the right terminology, but click the link. Click the link below. Let us know that you'd like to enroll or to receive credit for today's for listening in for today's podcast. Make sure you get that credit towards one of the levels, which is level 2 today. And then I hope you enjoyed the episode. I know I did. I've seen the looks on everyone's faces here today. We're gonna definitely process this and prepare for the next episode. We hope you tune in next month when we do this again with a group of panelists from ATSU. It should be another good time, good conversation. Until then, this is your friendly TLC team, Brittany, Julie, Brenda, and Quincy signing off. Ciao for now.